On Kiwi.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Talking politics with Russel Norman.
Co-leader of the Greens, Russel Norman, with us this morning. Morning, Russell.
Morena, Wammo.
You've been spending some time in the Naki over the past 24 hours.
I have, northern Taranaki. I've been up there. I was going down the Mokau River, which is one of the great rivers of that region that goes from a natural spring in Puriora Forest, just in the northwest corner of Lake Taupō, and flows in a westerly direction out through the kind of northern Taranaki.
Ah, so it's not only the Waikato that is fed by Taupo, but also the Mokau as well.
It's the Mokau comes from a natural spring out of Puriora Forest, but it's not actually connected to the Lake Taupō.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is a continuation of your river rafting tour?
Yep, that's right, Dirty Rivers tour.
And how was this river? What condition is it in?
It's an absolutely amazing river. It's a real hidden gem. I certainly didn't realise what an amazing river it was, because it goes down this incredible limestone gorge. And so, because that area used to be under sea, and so it's laid down these deep layers of limestone.
Wow.
And so the river slowly eats its way through it, and the limestone also has these tomo all through it, these big caves and holes and things, which the Māori in that region have buried. They've basically buried their ancestors in. So it's a truly astonishing piece of river. So you're in this deep gorge with these big limestone cliffs either side and caves and all this natural forest around it.
And is it drinkable at that stage?
No, it's probably the most polluted river in North Taranaki.
Crikey, even at that point?
Yeah, well, it's at that point it's probably okay, but you wouldn't want to drink it. But by the time it gets to the bottom, it's very heavily polluted as it makes its way down. It's also threatened. They're talking about putting a dam on this river, so that's the other thing that it's threatened by at the moment.
For irrigation? No,
this would be a hydroelectricity dam.
Oh.
It would only generate 6 to 10 megawatts, which is just absolutely nothing. I mean, a big wind turbine does 3.2 megawatts.
Yeah.
So to ruin a river for the sake of a few wind turbines does seem truly astonishing. So it's threatened by a dam, and it's also threatened. It's got major problems with agricultural pollution coming into it.
And is that mainly dairy in that part of the country?
Well, what happens with this river is it's got its headwaters in the kind of mudstone, sandstone country up there, so it gets big sediment flows from a lot of clearing was done up there with the subsidies that Muldoon put in. And so those subsidised clearings has meant that a lot of the mudstone and sandstone has come loose, and so you get these terrible sediment flows coming down. You get some naturally, but it's much higher because of the clearance of the bush. But there is still a lot of natural forest in the headwaters, which makes it quite good for native fish. But then as you come down, it starts to collect a lot of nutrient offlows. It's mostly sheep and beef, but there is a real a conversion to dairying underway in the region, which is just why it's so critical that we get some clean water rules put in place right now, so that when that conversion happens, it's happened within a framework of saying you can't destroy the rivers in the process of doing this giant conversion to dairying.
Okay. Did you end up collecting a sample of the river? Take it away with you?
No,
I do like that idea. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Yes. The only thing is, it's good to look at, but I mean, a river sample can look quite dirty if it's got a lot of sediment in it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's got a lot of E. coli or nitrogen or phosphorus in it. And to really do it properly, you need to do it in a scientific manner. But anyway, I mean, it's not a bad idea.
Let's look at the issue on the horizon over the next few weeks. Do you get the feeling, back in 2008 when the worldwide recession hit, we thought, oh no, dark days ahead, and then sure enough, 2009 is pretty dark, and then sort of last year things started to get more positive again, and then now this year it feels like there are even more darker days ahead. There doesn't seem to be a lot of positivity out there, and this budget that's coming up, what are they calling it, the black budget, the zero budget? I don't know, it's a bad budget, that's for sure. And it looks like there's going to be cuts all over the show, Russell.
Yeah, I mean, the government's books are in a difficult situation, partly through their own making, which was the big income tax cuts at the top end that they introduced in the last budget, which weren't fiscally neutral at the time. It would have cost, they were going to drive the budget into deficit by about $1 billion over 4 years. But since then, they're actually, the government books have got worse because they were going to make up the money that they lost by giving away big tax cuts at the high end. They were going to make it up by an increase in GST. But of course, people's spending has actually gone down. People haven't been spending as much as they were predicted to. So the amount of GST take has come down as well. So now they've got a big fiscal hole. And then on top of that, we've got the earthquake rebuild. So they're in a difficult position. But, difficult positions always have choices. So you can either increase taxes to raise the money, you can increase borrowing, or you can engage in these big spending cuts. And what the National Party is proposing to do is to cut spending pretty savagely, to borrow quite a lot of money, and not to introduce an earthquake levy. So what the Greens are saying is, look, we could have a temporary earthquake levy that would raise the money we need for the rebuild of Christchurch. That way we wouldn't have to increase borrowing significantly, and we wouldn't have to have these spending cuts. And I just think that is a much more rational approach to the situation we're in. And
also, but now that GST was increased to 15%, do you think we should still see a tax raising the general income taxes over the next couple of years?
Well, I think if we're just to deal with the particular situation we're in, which is the earthquake rebuild, I mean, we can actually put in place an earthquake levy, and I just think we can do that. I mean, it's not a huge amount. I mean, someone on $70,000 a year would pay an extra $6 a week. Someone on $50,000 would pay an extra 50 cents a week. And we delay the cut in the company tax rate. It was going to be dropped from 30 to 28%. And if you did all of that, if you introduced a levy like that, you'd raise around $1 billion a year, which would go most of the way over 5 or 6 years, or depending on how much money we need to raise, would pay for the rebuild. When you take into account all the money that we're getting in from the Earthquake Commission and from reinsurance and from private insurance.
But no, apparently a few jobs lost in the public service will take care of it all, Russell.
Well, it's a very risky strategy, what they're doing. It's risky on two fronts. One is that you could induce another recession by cutting all these jobs, because, of course, there aren't other jobs for people to go to. I mean, it's not like we're in the middle of a boom.
Yeah.
And by cutting spending to the low end, which is what they have to do, people on welfare, what they do is they don't save their money, they just spend it because they have to.
Yeah.
And so it's a very good way to stimulate an economy is to give money to the low end. And a very good way to drive an economy into recession is to cut money going to the low end. It's exactly what Ruth Richardson did in 1991 with the big budget benefit cuts then.
Here we go again.
And the other risk is actually a credit downgrade. Because the government won't raise a levy, it's going to have to borrow a lot of money. And that risks a credit downgrade. And if you think it's bad having to pay a little bit more for an earthquake levy, actually, if there's a credit downgrade, you'll have to pay heaps more in increased interest costs on housing mortgages.
I'm getting a 90s feeling. You feel like it's the 90s all over again?
It is, and it's just distressing how the government's response is so uncreative. I mean, to be honest, Labor's response is so uncreative as well. Labor just want to borrow more. Which I think is grossly irresponsible. I mean, we're in a serious situation in terms of private and public sector debt combined at around 85% of GDP. We don't want to borrow hugely. I just think, let's all kick in for the earthquake levy. That way we can avoid big spending cuts, which could drive the economy into recession, and we can avoid a credit downgrade, which could, mean that instead of paying a bit of an earthquake levy to pay the rebuild of Christchurch, we could end up paying big increases in our mortgage payments, interest rates, and all that money just flows overseas to the Australian banks. So where's the gain in that?
Russel Norman, co-leader of the Greens, cheers very much. Thanks for your time. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Cheers, mate.
Track now from